Black Writers After Hours. Artist and writer Maya Chowdhry creates immersive and democratic experiences for audiences, leaning into her past work in radio, audio walks and live art. Her practice interrogates themes such as water scarcity, food sovereignty and climate justice. Maya started writing as an adolescent. I asked her what drove her there.
Pain.
Pain?
Yeah.
Okay.
Teenage angst, pain, racism, coping with being a 14-year-old, Asian Scottish girl growing up in Scotland. And I don't really know where it came from because I come from a very academic family, very medical academic family. I don't know where the need to write poetry came from, but I've got these diaries where I'm writing poems to deal with that pain.
Okay, and were you sharing your work from when you were a teenager?
No.
Okay.
I did share a story, but that was like at school.
Yeah.
I entered a writing competition and I won it, but not the poetry. I think the poetry was my way of dealing with the emotional pain.
Okay. And then how did you, because you're a multidisciplinary artist, a multimedia artist, how did you start using these other mediums in addition to writing?
So my first professional job as an artist was as a film producer.
Okay.
And I worked for a Sheffield Women's Film Co-op. And whilst I was there, I was like making films on the side while I was like producing the films. And I think from there, I made a poetry film. I made a film about one of my poems. Actually, that was on 16mm film. And so I just saw that I wanted to express something, and then the art form came from whatever it was I was trying to express. So was it like a story, or was it something bigger that had characters in it, and then that would be a play? So I wrote... in fact, I think I went to a Black Writers conference in Sheffield, and I met somebody called Frances Ann Solomon, and she was running this... I don't know if she was running the Young Playwrights Festival, but she encouraged me to, and quite a lot of other writers there. I think she'd come along to like encourage other writers to get involved in the festival. So I wrote a radio play that was based on a poem of mine called Menstrual Monsoon. And I won. I was one of the winners in the Young Playwrights Festival. I don't remember what year it was now, sometime in the 80s anyway. And so things just kept sort of evolving and developing from an idea and how to express that idea. Is it a radio play? Is it a poem? Is it a film? And it came from that, really.
So did you always feel quite confident in trying new mediums, or would you seek out some like mentoring or training, or would you just like sort of have a go?
More have a go.
Okay.
And I wasn't confident at all.
Okay.
I think I was confident in my early 20s. And I remember going to an Asian women's script writing workshop either in Leeds or Bradford, and wanting to write short films. And I think it was more like have a go, but like sort of keep hidden the fact that you didn't feel confident at all, but that you just had something to say that was really important and you wanted to get it out into the world.
Okay. And a lot of your work focuses, especially more recent work, is focusing on climate change and the environment and our relationship with nature. Was there a specific turning point for you where you became really passionate about this, like our relationship with nature, or has that been sort of a lifelong interest? And again, are you sort of self-taught with regards to the biology and everything?
So one of the other ways I had to deal with teenage angst was to go out on the cairngorms and walk and be up on the top of a mountain with the deer. And I think that was my way of dealing with that. But also through doing that, I was like in a quite an elemental place and really thinking about listening to the wind, seeing the deer in the distance. I also was brought up in lots of tiny villages in Scotland, and we were on the coast of the Firth of Forth. And we would just be there in February in our swimming costumes on the beach.
Wow.
Or we'd be running about in the woods, climbing up trees. And that was a childhood that I had. And so that connection comes from that. But I also think it's not because people live in the countryside and they don't like it. It's like cold and muddy and things. So there's that, but also the fact that I was drawn to that, as an inspiration.
And then, but actually using like I think fathoming fungal frequencies, bringing it into your work. Are there specific things you have to consider when you're including sort of biological or eco elements in your work?
So you asked me about climate change, and my work's about social justice. And probably at a particular time, I started writing about climate change, probably from reading it somewhere, although I don't remember where. But I wrote a play about climate change in 2000, and nobody wanted to put it on. And I was so fed up that nobody wanted to put it on. They didn't recognise that, it's called the climate emergency now. They didn't recognise that this was an important thing that we should be making art about. So I decided to do something about climate change, and I went to India and I volunteered on an organic aloe vera farm. And I thought, I will go and do something. There was a massive drought. There'd been a drought for 3 years in Gujarat, and I thought I'll go and do something practical to affect the climate crisis. So you said recently, but actually that was 23 years ago.
Okay.
And through developing my artworks, I've had a call a few times about including, like you say, living organisms in my artworks. And that's come from, people saying to me, for example, somebody said to me that they'd never planted anything ever. They'd never grown anything from seed or never grown anything. And I grew up with my English grandparents in the countryside, and me and my siblings all had our own little garden. So we were gardening from being really, really little. So I was quite astounded, but not surprised that people had never grown anything from seed or planted anything. So I made a piece called Seeds on Earth, which is like an audio poem that you experience, and it has some instructions in it. But through that, you plant 3 different seeds. You have an apple seed to plant an apple tree. You have some mustard seeds to plant mustard seed plant. And you have some pea seeds to plant some peas. And the tree is to try and mitigate the effects of climate change. The peas are food, and the mustard seeds are medicine. So that's kind of how I led to putting, let's say, seeds, for example, into an artwork. And the things that you need to think about is, for me, is to think about that is seeds are very important, and very sacred to me. So to think about how you're going to use the seeds and not waste the seeds, and then think about all the practical things about how you're going to include that in your artwork. And for example, when we did that project, it was like in the autumn, and trees will start growing in the spring, but what you have to do is you have to put them in the fridge and stratify that seed so that you don't want it to start growing too soon, because it'll run out of energy and die. So thinking about everything as living beings.
Yeah. Okay. And you've described that sort of kind of participatory thing of planting a seed, and then I know that you've had another piece of work which is like an immersive dining experience. So what would you say is the importance or the value of immersive work versus kind of just going to view in a gallery or something?
Well, some people would say that a book is the most immersive thing that you can have, because you read a book, you immerse yourself in the world of that book, and that is very immersive. There's another meaning of immersive now in this digital age that we live in, and that is not the digital elements not kind of being obvious to the piece, so that you have an experience. I mean, also people would say, they watch a film and they're very immersed in it. They're in the dark in the cinema and they're very immersed in it. But some interactive digital installations, for example, it can be obvious what the digital elements are. So my definition of immersion, say, in the projects I'm making, is that the audience has an experience and they don't kind of feel like they have to press a button to make a part of the installation work or things like that. So in What's Eating Reality, people come for dinner, and it's composed of projections on the table and on the plates, and poetry and conversation, and people feel like they've come for dinner with a group of 12 people. So that would be like my definition of immersion.
And for you, it's an added angle or an added value. That is that something that you kind of came to realise, or had you always wanted to do that kind of work but just maybe didn't know how? Or?
Well, I think I've been to exhibitions where you come in and the digital technology is not working and you're not immersed at all, because you can't get it to work and you don't feel involved in it. So it's the involvement. So in What's Eating Reality, I want people, the piece is about food justice, but I want people to feel like they come and have a meal together, and the art is not separate from the experience. So they have an experience together. And what I was aiming for with that was, we're all in it together. If we're going to deal with food justice, we need to bring ourselves to the table. We need to talk, experience, listen. There's all different elements to it. Watch, and then think about what we can do.
And what does it mean for you when you say you want your work to be democratic?
So, well, that links very much in with What's Eating Reality. So although I'm like a kind of maitre d', sort of directing the dinner and saying to the chefs, come and do the starter, and, performing poetry. But I want it to feel democratic for the audience, that they don't feel like I've got all the answers. So during there's 5 different courses, and during each course there's different prompts and provocations, but I don't have the answer to what we can do about food justice. I want everybody to try and work it out together, and to feel like not only that we're working it out together, but that people come up with an idea that they can then do in their lives. So, for example, one time when we did the piece, there were a group of people who worked together who came to What's Eating Reality, and they said, oh, well, what we're going to do is we're going to have a lunch club. We work full time. We come in 5 days. So there's 5 of us, and each day somebody's going to bring in food and share. So that's what I mean by democratic.
Okay. What advice would you give to a writer who maybe they're mainly a page writer, or they might perform, but they want to kind of transition to including other mediums in their work, but they've seen one of your pieces, or like a piece in a gallery, or how would they get started if they have no experience whatsoever?
So I think maybe think of one medium that's not writing that you're very attracted to, that you go and see work in that medium. So it could be say the web. So one of the ways that I got into doing more digital work is through digital poetry. But I didn't really know very much about it before I started doing it. So I went to a conference. There was a conference called Trace, which was like online writing. I did a workshop in how to code for the web. So I guess choose the medium and then experience some of the work. Talk to people, perhaps. You might go to an opening of something. If you're interested in poetry film, for example, you might go to an opening or a conference or a workshop. So experiencing the work, and then I think getting the skills, and finding other people, perhaps getting some if you can't find any workshops, then maybe just reaching out to somebody whose work you admire and see if they could signpost you in that direction. Okay,
great, thank you. Who inspires you?
Well, loads of different people. I mean, at the moment, Vandana Shiva. So she's a physicist and an activist, and she's gone to the United Nations and spoke on behalf of Indian women who live in villages, and also spoke on behalf of seeds.
Okay.
She's written loads and loads of books, and she just speaks very well, very knowledgeable about what we need to do. We need to save seeds, and we also need to fight companies such as Monsanto who are basically producing something called terminator seeds, which means it's a seed, it grows into, say, an apple, but there are no pips, there are no seeds inside the apple. And then the farmers have to go and buy the seeds again from Monsanto. So she's a great inspiration.
Okay, thank you. And in your process, how do you come up with new ideas, and do you ever experience writer's block?
So ideas, they'll just come to me all the time. I might read something, I might have a conversation with somebody, and I might have an idea in a dream, and then I might do some research. So all sorts of different ideas come to me. I don't always act on those ideas. And what was the other part of the question?
Do you experience writer's block either, before, well, you said that you're kind of constantly having ideas, but then when you're actually trying to execute those ideas?
Well, I wouldn't call it writer's block, because I think writing is a process, and there's many different parts to that writing process, but I also think it depends what type of a writer you are. So I'm quite a chaotic binge writer. That's how I write, and so I think that it's up to the writer to decide what their process is, but I get loads and loads of ideas. I love writing first drafts of things. I find the second draft very, very tricky, because then it's like you've got to mould it into something, and it keeps slipping out of whatever it is you want it to be moulded into. It has its own will, the writing, and you can't, you're trying to make it into something and it just refuses. And then drafts, kind of all sorts of different drafts after that. So I think you can get stuck in different stages, but I wouldn't call it writer's block. And I think if you're stuck in a particular stage, it's about recognising what stage that is. So for me, who've been writing for a very long time, I can recognise those stages, and then I have kind of ways to get unstuck. I think new writers find that hard, because until you've written quite a bit and you've gone through different processes, you're not sure, A, what your process is, and then B, what stage you are in that process and what to do about it. And one book I read a very long time ago is called How to Write a Movie in 21 Days, the Inner Movie Method. And it divides a particular process into 21 days. And I think day 7 is like rest or something like that. And at the beginning, you put on your lucky socks and you get, well, this is for writing a film script, you get 300 pages and you get page 1. I mean, this was when we had typewriters. You get page 1, you write the title, or you might just write working title, and then you get page 300 and you write the end on it. And then she says, all you need to do is just fill in all the pages in between.
Yeah. Just giving yourself that skeleton can actually just help you maybe sometimes.
But I actually use that for playwriting, and I used to think, right, I'm on day 11, go to the book, what does it say if you're on day 11, and then kind of use that as a bit of a model.
Okay. Yeah. Nice, thank you. And yeah, what's next for you?
So I've recently done a master's in sound design. I've always really been interested in sound. I was like a boom operator when I worked at the film co-op. But then over the years, I've been much more visually dominant in what I've been creating. And I've worked a lot with musicians and sound artists. And during the lockdown period, I couldn't work with some of the people I was going to be working with, and I got a grant and bought loads of like sound equipment, because I was couldn't go to a studio, so I was having to do things myself, and I got really excited about studio recording and doing things myself. And I got really into, would go for walks and be doing field recordings, but it sounded so different because before that I was just using my phone. So I got a proper recorder and proper microphones. And so I went on this massive deep dive doing the masters in sound design. And what I've been doing recently, coming back to what we were saying about living beings and making art with living beings, I've been creating soundscapes from mushrooms, using something called biodata sonification. So it's where you put electrodes into the mushrooms and you take that microcurrent and translate it into something called MIDI, which is what digital audio workstation programs use. That's what's next. I've been making sounds from soundscapes with water, with orchids, with moss, and I'm just having the best time. So I'm going to be carrying on doing that. There's also something called sound text, which is where you make a soundscape and then you write to it.
Okay.
So that was also something that I did during lockdown. I did an online course in sound text. And so what I want to do is, now I've been working on the soundscapes quite a lot, I want to start writing to those soundscapes and just seeing where it takes me.
Okay. Lovely. Yeah, excited to read or hear what you're up to next. So yeah, thank you so much, Maya. It's been great to chat with you and hear about your process and your journey, and I hope you enjoyed it too.
Thank you.
This episode's prompt is: spend some time in nature listening to the mushroom soundscape on headphones. Write a passage around one paragraph, celebrating and advocating for the nature you spent time in. This is a Culture Word production. Thank you to our funders, The Space and Arts Council England. Recorded at Silver Lining Music Studio.